Hey everyone, Luke here, and welcome to the Thunk Tank Podcast. This is a first episode we're doing where we're sitting down with a legit brewer and trying to pick his mind about the craft of brewing. So we were joined by craft beer brewer and friend of the podcast, Justin. Justin went to Rockingham Community College for their brewing, distillation, and fermentation program. And since then, he has worked at various craft beer breweries around the North Carolina area. So that's how Johnny got in touch with him. We recorded this episode in two parts, so this is the first part where it's just Johnny and Justin. They discuss craft beer process, industry trends, oak and barrel aging, and various other kinds of beer-themed topics. And then I joined them for a second hour over Skype to ask some of my own questions. That's going to be a separate episode, so it should follow this one in about a day or two. I just have to throw that my audio and their audio together, so look out for that. If you enjoy this type of episode, then let us know, and we can actively try to find more brewers from different places and pick their brains about beer. We want to keep it informative and interesting for all beer levels, so let us know. Okay. Before the episode starts, we do have some business to take care of, especially since this episode is all about beer. We have to toast our Patreon subscribers, otherwise known as Thunk Tributers. These are the guys that help the show, stay on the air, so to speak. These are the people that understand our stinky thinking and our craft beer fueled funky thunking. Hey, maybe let's see if we can get thunking into the dictionary this year. Thunking. The attempt at serious thinking under the influence of craft beer, all the while knowing that you will slip off the rails and devolve into nonsense at some point. It can be like one of those Japanese concept words that it carries a whole paragraph of meaning, but just in one word. Maybe a shorter version. We can just call it thunk. Thunk is a state of being, of enlightenment, of awakened wisdom. It can be like the Pali word bodhi in Buddhism, when you're awakened. Because these Patreon subscribers of ours get it. They have thunk. They emanate thunk. They are thunk. So here's a thank you toast to Kara, to Drew, and to Brett. And you know what? I'm only supposed to toast the $2 and up patrons, but fuck it. I'm feeling pretty generous today. Let's have a thank you toast as well to Zach and to the podcast A Topic a Month for also giving us $1 per episode. Also, Kara, you're a fourth tier Thunk Tributor, so you can technically email a Would You Rather question, and we will use it on a future episode. Of course, that's pending Genie's approval and the approval of the local Genie Council. You gotta keep these Would You Rathers extra weird, keep it fucked up enough, otherwise the Genie Council won't sign off on it. And if anyone listening wants to support our podcast, you can do that for as little as $1 an episode by subscribing at patreon.com/thunktankpodcast. Not only do you help us out, keeping the podcast hosted and giving us time to research and all that, but you'll also get access to our Drunk Tank Extra episodes. These are the off-the-rail sessions that we record after an episode ends. More beer is definitely involved. Achieving thunk is almost a guarantee in our Drunk Tank episodes. But mostly we just wouldn't dream of releasing that nonsense to the regular public, so it's for you special people. And if you can't support us directly, you can help us out by leaving a rating or a review wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can share it with someone who you might, who you think might like it. Lastly, we have a new website. It's thunktankpodcast.com. We post episode extras. We do blog posts that accompany some of the episodes. So check that out and let us know what you think. All right, that's about it. Hope you're having a good day. Put those goggles on, prepare for being in a state of thunk, and let's jump in the tank.
Attention humans, this is a Thunk Tank. Please insert this podcast directly into your nearest orifice for viewing pleasure.
Okay, you ready? Oh shit.
Welcome to the Thunk Tank. Welcome to the Thunk Tank.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Come into our Thunk Tank.
Luke, don't switch to the other peanuts.
Welcome to the Thunk Tank. Come in the tank. We're thinking, and we're drinking,
And we're thunked.
and we're thunked.
Oh my god, I'm probably more beer than man if we go far enough back at this point. Okay. Welcome to the Thunk Tank, everybody. We got a special episode this week. Finally, after threatening for a long time, we're going to do something actually beer-related. I got my buddy Justin here, who is a brewer by trade, and we're going to have a nice beer discussion, and maybe we'll bring Luke in later and let him ask some of his dumb layman beer questions. And we can set him straight and drop some knowledge. So welcome, Justin.
Howdy, guys.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm here.
He's here. So let's start off with the beer we're drinking. That's how we usually start these. Crap, what are we drinking again? It's a
White Elephant.
a Milkshake IPA from White Elephant Brewing.
Yep.
What do you think?
It's good. It's good. It's pretty. I mean, it's very hazy. Got a good color to it. A little yellowish orange.
Now, there's no head on this. Is that the milkshakeness that just kind of kills that off?
I don't really know. Like, in order for it to be a milkshake IPA, it's made with lactose, but I don't think that lactose does anything in terms of like to kill head retention. So I don't really know. They might use some sort of fruit in here.
Well, this beer is called Creamsicle Soft Serve to give you the idea of that like juicy fruitiness.
If it's creamsicle, then it probably has some sort of citrus fruit in it.
Yeah, so it is a fruited milkshake IPA.
Yeah, so it's the
with a
fruit.
bit of lactose, half a pound per barrel of blood orange, and then
That's what it
Tahitian
is.
vanilla beans.
Yeah,
Ooh,
so
and then double dry hopped. So that sounds awesome, and it tastes great.
yeah, so like the essential oils and then the citric acid is what kills them.
So that fruit,
Yeah.
the fruit acids. Okay.
Yes.
So, head retention for not. So we're gonna try to not get too inside baseball with the beer stuff. Try to keep it pretty accessible. Head retention sounds fancy. It just means how long do the bubbles last on the foamy head of your beer?
Can you keep your foam?
Can you keep your foam? And certain beers, really no foam. This one, not a lot.
None.
Pretty much none. But you know what? I don't mind. And this is a brewery up in from Mount Airy.
Solid. I mean,
Yeah.
and the name actually is it tastes like the name.
It really does. It's very soft, servy, creamsicle-y.
Yeah. Got that little that orangey vanilla kind of character going on.
For sure. Which seems to be the big growing thing in craft beer is for the last, I don't know how many years, 10 years, it's been the juicy, fruity, hazy craze. And I tend to split with the other members of my other thunkers here. Joe and Luke are all about that haze craze. They probably drink a Treehouse beer or a Trillium beer every other episode, it seems like. And
Lucky.
they yeah, well, they live up there in the Northeast, but they just seem to be like kind of locked into this particular styles, and I kind of try to gently break them out. But let's get let's get your take on the haze craze. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that there's a line in terms of how far, like, this beer is hazy, but it's still attractive. Like, it's still visually appealing. It doesn't look like someone took a watery shit in a glass. Anything that looks like butt pee or pond water, that's just bad. It's bad brewing. It's bad brewing practice. It's bad cellaring practice. If it doesn't look like, if you don't look at your beer and immediately think like, oh man, that's an attractive, drink. It's something that I'm looking forward to drinking. Then you fucked up.
Yeah. Maybe talk directly into the mic, though. I know it's weird. I'm staring at you. You want to stare back, but
Let's do this.
let's do
So
that.
I can,
There you
so
go.
I can
I can come over here, too.
maintain eye contact.
There you go.
There we go.
That's better. I think, it's picking you up a little better now.
But yeah, my big thing is that there's definitely a law of diminishing returns where like you can make a like hazy, juicy, dry hopped New England whatever, and it be a delicious beer. As and you need to have like a thoughtful approach to making that beer. There are plenty of breweries around here that don't necessarily subscribe to that. It's just like they just throw more and more and more and more and more shit at it, and like just dry hop 5 and 6 times more than what any rational brewer would. And it's like, oh well, this is super. It's super rare. And
if some's good, more's better, right?
Right, but it not like I said, the whole like diminishing returns thing.
Yeah.
It's like at some point you're not really accomplishing what you set out to accomplish, and you're just winding up with this just horrible, discolored, turbid turd of a
turbid.
Turbid. Just this disgusting looking drink, and I like. My fear is that those beers and like these, not to like get too into the weeds and like off topic, but the beers that like people are like the double, triple, quadruple milkshake, tangerine, fucking baby toenail, angel tears, and fetal tissue, IPA or whatever. It's like
a UPA, an umbilical cord pale ale.
Yeah, it's that. Like at some point you're one of the brewers that I used to work under. He would always say, he all the time, the emperor has no clothes, man, and the tail is wagging the dog. The tail is wagging the dog, and like I never knew what the fuck he was talking about. And like now I get it, where it's just like you're pushing the envelope for the sake of pushing the envelope, and it's not even remotely like a thoughtful application towards brewing. It's just you're throwing 96 different ingredients into some beverage and trying to pass it off.
Yeah,
as
is
beer.
it a beer at that point?
Right,
Any grain in there even? Or?
I don't think that you can call it beer, and my problem with it is that you can already kind of see it a little bit in the market, that it's pushing people away. Like they don't like they're getting a little gun shy. So like you have more and more people that are just like, I just want beer flavored beer. I don't want anything like, don't put any weird shit in this.
Well, isn't that a weird, because they're still trying to capture people into the craft world, but they're trying to keep the people in there. Right. Since there's so many options,
there's two
they're
different
trying to.
Camps.
So you're trying to get people that don't like beer and say, well, this doesn't even taste like beer. This tastes like a creamsicle. I can drink this. Guess what? You like beer now.
Right.
And then there's the people who like beer who are just struggling.
Like beer for what it is.
But so many people make good beer now that I feel that some places think they have to go crazy and over the top to try to keep those. But yeah, there is a silent group of beer drinkers who just want, they just want a good IPA. Just give me your one that tastes like an IPA.
Right.
That's what I like to drink. Yeah.
Right. Like, I think that with the market just like ever expanding and growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, breweries are still kind of feeling the need to like, I've got to do something that's going to set me apart from the masses and like gonna make me stand out. And like,
well, there's
honestly,
so much competition, you kind of have to.
I disagree though. I disagree because there is a lot of competition, but it's also synergy. So like if there's a brewery that's directly across the street from us, as soon as they open up, like, are they competition? Yes, technically, but they're also going to bring more and more people, because now there's 2 breweries on your corner, not just one.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's also going to force you to up your game.
That's the reason all the car dealerships are on the same street, right? Even though they're from different companies, it's because.
Right, because
someone's driving down there to shop for cars. Yeah, that's where people looking for cars are going. That's
exactly.
Where you want
that's
to be.
Why people are flocking to Asheville like crazy. Yeah. And you don't hear people from Burial. You don't hear people from Twin Leaf or whatever complaining that, oh shit, there's another brewery that's opening up here, because at the end of the day, that brewery is just going to bring its own little micro following with it, and it's just making Asheville an even bigger scene, while simultaneously weeding out the people that are making subpar product. It's just going to push everybody.
There's 30 breweries in this town. If I have one bad beer from you,
I'm not coming back.
I'm not coming back.
I've got 29 other great options.
There's other ones I might not get to that'll close down before I even get there. So it is great from the beer drinker's perspective that way, the choice.
And but I think that the fear of that potentially happening is also what's pushing and driving this whole, like, oh well, we put like donuts and hog's feet and fucking whatever other weird shit we could,
trotters and Boston cream. That sounds good, actually.
Mugwort and foreskins. Right. Oh, it's weird.
But as a beer guy, you would try that, right? If somebody poured it, you wouldn't try it?
No, man. No. There was a guy that a fellow brewer that recently was, who I respect a lot, that was telling me of a beer that he brewed with Rocky Mountain oysters. He brewed with testicles,
bison testicle or cow testicles specifically, right?
Yeah, and it's like, well, that's a thing that you can do.
What kind of beer? Rocky Mountain oyster style.
I want to say it was an IPA. Yeah, but
I did find a recipe from the 16th century for cock ale.
Yeah,
and it's a 15-gallon batch where you ferment it, and like during active fermentation, 4 days in, you throw a plucked steamed chicken in to add a hearty, meaty flavor, and they called it cock ale. And apparently, it was good enough that someone wrote the recipe down. So.
They probably wrote that recipe down just like on the off chance that anybody ever decides to throw a bunch of ingredients and things together and it looks like this, just don't do it.
It's a warning. It wasn't a recipe.
Yeah, it's like right here, this is not great.
Well, before we go, I want to talk about historical beer, and because there's a lot of like, why do they call it that? Like, why is it called this? And you're a good guy to talk to about that stuff.
Oh, I hope.
But I didn't really introduce you that well. Give me a quick, 2-minute introduction of yourself, your how you got into craft beer, and what your credentials are. Because I just kind of said, hey, here's Justin.
Oh, okay.
Because you are a real brewer, right? That's what your taxes say.
Yes, yeah. Maybe, I think.
Probably, right?
Perhaps.
Brewer.
So I was a home brewer for several years. While I was working in hospital pharmacy and just having the soul just sucked out of me every day. And I loved beer, loved brewing. And then one day, just a random encounter with like my old boss wound up getting in touch with my wife and letting her know that her brother was in a brewing program at a school near us and that I should look into it. And I was working in the OR at the time and literally called and registered for classes that day to start going through this brewing program. So I went to RCC for their brewing, distillation, and fermentation program. I got my certificate from those guys, and then am I allowed to mention names?
Sure, it's up to you. It's your. It's okay. You disclose as much as you'd like, sir. Okay. We don't have a big listener base.
So my social security number. I was working at the hospital part time, and then started brewing part time at Natty Greens in Greensboro, and I brewed there for probably 2 years, something like that. And then, oh no!
You just keep talking.
So I brewed with Natty's for 2 years, and started off with them. That was about a 17 barrel. In Greensboro, it was a 17 barrel German system. It would have been a technically mash mixer, lauter tun, boil kettle, holding tank, and whirlpool. So 5 vessel system. I brewed with them for about 2 years and then left there. and went to brew for Foothills Brewing in Winston-Salem, and I worked with them for as a brewer and cellarman for about 2 years on there.
That's actually where we met.
Yeah, that is true. I brewed with them for 2 years. I did brewery and then cellar work on their system. They had a 60 barrel 3 vessel.
And for people listening that don't know, what is a barrel in terms of beer production? Because we all think of it as a wooden barrel, oil drum barrel.
A barrel is a way to measure volume. That's 31 gallons.
Okay, so 60 barrels is
60 barrels would be 120 kegs of like what you would
so
think
120
of as a keg.
30-gallon kegs.
No.
Or 120 15 gallon kegs.
15.5 gallon. Yeah. Like a keg of what most people
So how many
think
gallons of beer are we talking?
A shit ton. 60,
It's a lot. 60 barrels is a lot.
60 times 31 it'd be
So one batch of beer on that system, you're making over 100 kegs worth of beer.
Yeah, you're
okay.
talking
So
like
big production.
1,800 gallons. Roughly.
Okay, yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, and it was a shit pot ton of beer.
I do 6 gallons at home. So for people to get a point of reference.
Yeah,
60 barrels for 6 gallons.
Brewing in anywhere from anywhere from a 100 barrel fermenter up to a 400 barrel fermenter, which our 400 barrel fermenter is actually held on average anywhere from 480 to just shy of 500 barrels. So you're talking, 1,000 kegs of like what most people would traditionally think of as a keg's worth of volume.
So that's why you go to school for it, because if you fuck up 1,000 kegs,
yeah, you're fucked.
if you mess up one batch, that's 1,000 kegs, 100 beers each. That's a lot of beer to waste.
Yeah, so one you got to think of it in terms of just sheer numbers. If you were to take all of that beer and sell it through your tap room, one half barrel has roughly 150 pours in it, and you're talking $5 roughly.
Yeah, just pick an average $5.
Yeah.
So that's $500 a keg at least.
Yeah, we'll make it easy and say that it's $500 per that you're making back off of that keg. Now times 1,000 of them.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to lose. That's $500,000.
Right, and
Wow.
that's not taking into consideration that's potential sales, but you're also taking into consideration the tank residency, how long that beer was in that, how long that vessel was tied up, and you weren't making other beers that were going to be producing revenue for the brewer. You're also talking ingredients. You're talking energy. You're just in terms of keeping the lights on for the 2 days that it took to fill that brewery. You're talking all of the labor. 48 hours straight worth of man hours to fill that tank, all of the ingredients,
And that's before you try to sell it in the marketplace with sales reps and distributors and all trying to deal with all that
those
stuff.
numbers change drastically whenever you sell it in the market, though.
Right.
So
Wholesale versus retail.
Yeah, there's a massive disparity in between what you make off of one half barrel if you sell it through your taps versus if you sell it to the guy next door to have him pour it through there.
And that's kind of why, I think in our generation, we're seeing the distribution system break down.
The model is changing.
Because people don't even want, people used to want the cool stuff from far away. It used to be kind of cool to get something from China. We're kind of over that. We'd rather get stuff local.
Local is
the local movement.
Local is
seems
where
to
it's
be.
at.
Yeah, so I guess that helps both the customers and the producers there.
Right, at 100%. Yes, that's why you keep seeing more and more breweries and you're going to continue to see more breweries pop up that try to rely on distribution as absolutely little as possible, that don't want to get distributorships involved, that don't want to get any sort of third party involved, because anytime that you have a third party or a middleman, you got to pay that fucker, and nobody wants to do that.
Right. Well, I put all the work into the beer. Right. I already have customers willing to buy it. I'm going to give you how much?
Right, and your margins are immediately cut by 70%.
Yeah.
You know, it like if we make a half barrel of any beer, or like our beer sells at a half barrel is sold for like $169. That's the cost to
the
go.
distributors.
Yes.
It's usually somewhere around there, right?
Yes. So, we don't do distributors. We just sell directly to, because we don't require. We're small enough that we don't have to rely on distributors. I'm the distributor. I get to load up my car with whatever, and
which is also great. That's that super local,
right?
You know,
yeah, it is great until they tell me that
you have to destroy your car with kegs.
Yeah, and I don't get paid mileage, which is awesome.
So what breweries that people, because beer tourism is growing more and more in the country, what breweries would you say are doing that model well and are worth visiting? The obvious one that jumps out to me is like New Glarus. They're a big brewery in Wisconsin. They win awards and stuff. They make great beer, but they don't distribute outside of the state because they don't, for the same reason. Like their local decision, the line they drew was the state.
Well, I mean, there's a ton of like the whale breweries that, like, I don't think, like, who is it, Alchemist up in Vermont? I don't think that they distribute very much, especially not outside of their state. I want to say that they're all in state of Hill Farmstead.
Yeah, so those are the ones I think of. Hill Farmstead,
right? And like
Heady Topper, New Glarus.
They've figured it out. Like, A, they're making really, really great product. B, they are using both the hype, but also like scarcity and exclusivity to like drive that hype, and therefore push their sales even more and more and more and more and more, because everyone is claiming, like, everybody wants to get Heady Topper, everybody wants to get Focal Banger, everybody wants to get whatever fucking Hill Farmstead beer you can, but it's like you never see it ever. So like they rely on that, and that's kind of what they use to sort of justify the price point that they put their beers on, or that they sell their beers for. Yeah.
Now, do you think it's intentional, or because there's always that risk, like people want your beer, like people will pay for Heady Topper in California and Arizona, like people want that, beer nerds want that beer all over the country, right?
So I think that the biggest, one of the biggest, well,
I'm just saying that people want those beers. So instead of saying, let's build a building 3 times the size and make 6 times the product, because then you overexpand. And
yeah, what pretty much as soon as the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't get it back in. So I think that they definitely have the mindset of like what we're doing is working, and like not allowing greed, or like the desire to just constantly be a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger animal and a bigger beast and machine, like that, like the fact that they haven't let themselves get to that point. I think that that's also what's really driving their success, because like even if they were doing a quarter of what they're doing now in terms of their production, they would still, I can almost guarantee you, they would still be a profitable business. It's just everything that they're doing right now is just above and beyond, and it's money in the bank.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't.
I guess that's a weird decision, though, from maybe not from the beer like auteur point of view, but from the like financial business side. It's like, wait, your notoriety is growing faster than your actual like inventory and
right. But that's a great thing, though, because as long as the scarcity is on your side, you're always going to have demand for your supply. So like cap your supply, keep that scarcity in your pocket, and just constantly be playing that as your fucking ace in the hole all the time, is that you have this scarcity and this exclusivity, and
we only make so many.
Yeah, we know. We sell out after 2 days and then it's gone. And it's so, guess what's going to always happen? You're never going to not sell out.
But see, this is the same reason I hate Nike. or like those specialty shoe releases they do, or Jordans or whatever. I have a friend who collects shoes, and I think it's absurd and still a waste of money. Like when you buy a car, they say it's a bad investment because half of the value is gone as soon as you drive it off the lot because it's not new anymore.
Car.
Yeah,
right.
a new car. So I like same thing. You're going to buy like a sports sneaker for hundreds of dollars. If you actually play sports in it, it's lost all of its value.
Yeah, it's dumb.
And is it really making you that much better? But what the other thing they do is they'll be like, oh, new shoes coming out. They'll release 5,000 and charge $500 a shoe, and then they run out. And then a week later, they release another 50,000 or 100,000 of them, and they have millions of them. They're made for pennies in a sweatshop somewhere, and they create the scarcity,
right,
on purpose.
I mean, that's marketing, I guess.
I know, but like it's weird. It doesn't piss me off with beer, but it does when it comes to like gas prices or oil companies, or pick a thing that they do that with and it ends up costing us more, and it's annoying. For some reason, I give it a pass with craft beer. If the beer's good, maybe that's the difference. It's a good product. I'm fine with it.
Well, I mean, and I also think that you understand, like the process and the amount of work and labor that goes into making 10 barrels or 20 barrels or 100 barrels or 400 barrels of whatever. You understand the amount of labor that actually goes into it. So it's a lot easier for a brewery, especially a smaller brewery, to say, like, yeah, the scarcity is here because we can't our production schedule is limited. I mean, we can't focus all of our time into doing these like super crazy artisanal, like one-off crazy beers that we're going to just bottle and only sell in the bottles and only sell it out of our tasting room. You can't. It's not really sustainable.
Yeah.
I guess that's the biggest.
It isn't like another craft beer myth. You go to most brewery tap rooms and they'll have a selection of different things, but they'll have that kind of generic Bud Light Mick Ultra clone, let's say, or
right.
emulating that style. Golden ales and pilsners and Kolsch's, but they're not.
Don't you talk shit about Kolsch?
I love Kolsch, but I've had some bad Kolsch's.
Yeah.
Or they'll make a hoppy Kolsch, and it's really not.
Why would you make a hoppy?
I've had them. I'm just saying.
Then is it hoppy? Then you fucked up.
But yeah, they have that, and it's so that they say they have something for the non-beer nerds, the people who just want a beer that tastes like a beer, the beer they've grown up drinking, but
right.
different. But
right.
Isn't it also make good money on those beers because there's a lot less ingredients?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like it's just as good for the brewery as it is for the friend you dragged along. That's like, can I get a Miller there? And you're like, no, you can't. But we'll find something you like.
100%. Especially at a brewery that their prices don't fluctuate depending on the beer that you're drinking. Like there are going to be some places that you go that the IPA is going to be $7.50 because
more ingredients.
IPAs are exponentially more time consuming, and they require way more expensive ingredients than say just a standard basic Kolsch golden just innocuous malt driven, fairly low bitterness and low hop character beer. So there's definitely like, I'm trying to think of how I can phrase this to.
Come on.
I guess, yeah, fuck it. Right, who cares? So, back whenever I was working at this... I was working at a brewery, and that brewery had a sour program, and we were putting out different sour beers, and there were some beers that had fruit in them, and there were other beers that didn't have fruit in them, and the ones that had fruit in them were all priced the same, and they were in smaller bottles, and they were about $15 a bottle. Then there's this one beer that doesn't have fruit in it, and it's in a slightly larger bottle, and it was about $7 more per bottle. And the thing is, the more expensive beer was actually the cheapest
to produce.
Our overall cost per bottle was significantly lower than every other sour beer that we put out. But we used that to offset and to compensate for how expensive it was, the lack of margin in the other beers. So it's definitely don't kid yourself into thinking that that's not something that every brewery is keeping in the back of their head, because they 100% are. There's not a brewery out there that exists solely because we're just passionate about making beers and that's why we're in this game. At the end of the day, it still comes down to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
And
if you don't have money, you can't brew beer.
Right. And if you're not continuing to make money, then you can't afford to continue to make beer. So that's definitely the cheap kind of swilly-ish. Not to knock those beers, because there are some really good ones out there, but the cheaper swilly-ish beers, that's
the bread and butter beer.
And they help offset the cost of the crazy single, double, triple, quadruple.
Those are the French fries, right? You spend $1 for a burger at McDonald's, and then you spend $1 on the fries, and you think that's a fair price, but that meat costs way more than just frying a potato.
Well, or a drink, or the drinks at any fast food restaurant. That's always what has completely blown my mind.
Bottle of water is $2, but a 64-ounce soda is 99 cents or something. I never understood that. Didn't you use water to make that soda? Why is it cheaper? What kind of water did you use? So that's what I was wondering.
It's the fact that they include crack in it. Just make it super addictive.
Yeah.
You just keep.
They make it up in volume.
Yeah.
Because once they get you, they got you.
Well, yeah. We got another one.
All right. Well, what else you got?
I think that I covered my.
I think that's your CV pretty well. Your credentials,
more or less. Now
bona fides.
Now I work somewhere else doing other stuff with beers.
Yeah,
and it's fun, and I like it.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about wood aged beer, oak aged beer, because I'm a internet learner guy, meaning I'm dumb and didn't do well in traditional education. So I like to look into things that are weird to other people and I find interesting. And one is this resurgent of barrel aging beers. And you see it a lot with, Bourbon County is the big one everyone knows, or CBS or KBS. These breweries that do these big
CBS
stouts.
Was real good.
It was good this year. I have one I can give you. And they'll take these big stouts, imperial stouts, 9, 10, 11, 12% beers, and throw them in a bourbon barrel for a few months, weeks, months, whatever, and you get a nice richness to the beer that seems like a new thing, a newer fad when you talk to people. But when I was researching, all beer used to be stored in. Yeah, all beer was in wood for much longer than it has it. Look, steel tanks, glass tanks, that's only 100 years old.
Right.
Metal kegs are pretty new. I think that was a 20th century creation. And everything was either barrels and even glass is pretty recent. They used to drink out of leather mugs, and it sounds fucking horrible. Think about how do you clean out the leather mug you were drinking out of the bar, or the guy was drinking out of before you at the bar.
You just
fill me up a leather mug
and hope for the best.
Man, I'll show you some pictures of those mugs. They're like, oh, geez, I don't even want to touch it.
I
drink
am
out.
going to respectfully decline.
But
thanks.
But yeah,
just pour it in my hand. I'll drink it out of that.
People seem surprised when they try barrel aged stuff, and they actually like it. So what's your take on it?
On what aspect?
Wood.
On wood.
on just wood aging beer and that the ancientness of it and all that. And
well, I mean,
what is it? What's happening? What's going on when I put my beer? What's happening in that barrel?
What's it doing?
If it's a bourbon barrel, why don't you just put bourbon in the beer? Isn't that the same thing?
Well, almost, but that's also really illegal.
Fair enough.
That's called seeding. That's not good.
Okay.
You get in a world of hurt for that. No, the process is really, really, really old. I mean, that's the barrel was essentially the the recognized it's sort of universal shipping container for
everything,
but
dry and wet goods, right?
Right. Yes, but I mean, everything includes beer. The Belgians, they started figuring out that even before germ theory and microscopes and whatnot came along, they figured out that you could there were certain things that could happen with barrel aging a beer that would cause it to turn sour and would develop all of these different really, really interesting characteristics and flavors
and that's just through trial and error, just because they've been making beer for so long there.
Yes.
Okay.
And then essentially they, even though they didn't, there was a lot that wasn't necessarily understood as they didn't know the why on a microbiological level, but they knew the how.
Mm-hmm.
That can be said for back in the first glasses of beer that were ever discovered through serendipity. This grain was sitting in a vase and it accidentally got wet, and then oh shit, whenever I drink it I feel happy.
Or how a king, I don't know if gold is better, but people die when they drink out of those leather cups. I'm drinking out of gold because nobody dies when they drink out of gold. We don't know why. Everything I eat off of is gold, though. That's why they surround themselves with gold dishes and plates and cups and shit, right? And chalices.
Is that really why?
I always thought so. Is because gold is pretty aseptic. It doesn't really carry bacteria and all that.
Is that Trump's is that his?
No, I think he looks at a room that's that an interior designer
who's so nice,
who spent their life designing, doing this and color schemes. They go,
yeah, but it's not gaudy enough.
You know what though? What if we just drape everything in gold? Just gold. This is a nice bathroom. I understand you're going for a Victorian thing. What if that toilet seat was gold though? So I think it's just, where can I add gold here with him? But but that's the same idea. They didn't understand, or like judges, how judges are way up. Where a judge sits in the court, they're sitting above you, is because they knew if you were down with the criminals, and they knew somehow if you exchanged air with these poor street criminals, that the judges would get sick and get all sorts of diseases. So they just raised them up, so they'd be down there with their lice and all sorts of diseases and whatnot. So that's part, and also it's scarier when a guy's yelling down at you what your punishment is. But it's also
that where the phrase "talking down to me" is?
Maybe. But there used to be a common thing, at least in England and continental Europe, where they call it jail fever. And you would if you went, it's like kennel cough. It's just there's so many sick, poor people going through there. If you went to jail for any amount of time, you'd catch the jail fever. And if you were being brought up in front of judges and magistrates, they didn't want to deal with that shit. So they raise themselves up. And
just give me 6 feet. I'll be fine.
That's why they wore wigs, too, is because you can't get lice if you shave your head. If your wig gets lice, you just throw it out and get a new wig. But if you get lice in your hair, now you got to shave your hair, throw all your clothes out. So they would just shave their heads, and
why?
That way you were safe from
the... Why do you know that?
Because I look things up online. It's the same reason I like barrels.
At what point did you just think, man... why are judges' seats elevated? And also, wigs.
Isn't it a
what's
book,
up with
probably?
What's up with those?
I have insomnia.
And just help me, Google, and just
help
me, Google. Did a little deep dive.
But yeah. So back to beer.
Sorry to get off.
No, I'm the one who took us off the rails there. But yeah, it's that same. So I just love that in beer too. There's so many weird little historical things.
Well, and now it's just. I don't know. People are I feel like aging beers in barrels. It's an easy way to add a different level or a different level of depth, or add some nuanced character to a beer, while at the same time kind of tipping your cap to the old days and how things used to be. It's definitely I don't know, an acknowledgement of the history of the product.
Because people are starting to go that way with other things. These are hand jarred pickles or something. There's
That's
more
dumb.
cachet to that than it being.
That's dumb.
Or not that, but you get the mason jars and
I don't
pasteurize
get it.
and boil.
Don't get it.
And they boil their peas or whatever to seal them up. You've seen how people do that, right?
Oh, no.
You know how to jar things?
No.
Oh, well, you put the shit in the jar, and then you, like, seal it up, and you kind of, like, put it, like, pasteurize it in the jar in a boiling pot, and like, so you could store it that way. But whatever. I'm just talking about weird hipster things people do. Or, like, kimchi. Everyone's eating kimchi or kombucha they make in their kitchen now. It's like, you could just go take a vitamin, but there's something about that, hands-on live culture thing people like.
Yeah, but the vitamin doesn't taste nearly as bad.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely an acquired vitamin taste in those like live culture things. But
in the booch,
I wanted to just ask you about barrels a little bit because, from what I understand, and just going to distillery tours and talking to people like you, is when you put liquid in a barrel like that. Like when you put whiskey into a barrel, everyone thinks of whiskey barrels. We know that. What whiskey looks like, that nice brown color, that's from the barrel, right? When whiskey goes into the barrel, it's clear.
Yes.
Just like any sort of ghost whiskey is just unaged whiskey, right? That ghost shit, it's just a barley moonshine.
Yeah, it hasn't developed any of the character.
So it's when you put it in, it's pulling flavors from the wood by temperature changes, I guess. It expands, it contracts.
It's called barrel breathing.
Okay, this is what I brought you in for. I want these terms and stuff. So lay it on me, baby.
Whenever your barrel is breathing at like the hottest point in the day, the wood is going to expand. And
what does that do?
I'm getting there.
Sorry, I'm excited. You cough right into that mic. Get up on it. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry, guys. At the coldest point in the evening, the wood is going to contract. And as it's expanding and it's contracting, it's pulling in air and it's releasing oxygen. So it's pulling oxygen in and it's releasing oxygen. And it's pulling beer in and it's releasing beer. So it's constantly having these like micro ingressions of both like beer and oxygen that are mixing, and
it's like a sponge, a really firm, slow sponge.
Right, exactly. But on like a very, 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 very small scale. So as you're doing that, you are introducing wood sugars. You're introducing that oak character. You're also getting a little bit of oxidation that's occurring. So you like that can impact your beer slightly, but not to the point where it's going to like hopefully
enough to maybe smooth out flavors that might have been
while not having like this just straight up like, oh well, this is a bourbon barrel aged cardboard barley wine. You don't want that, obviously, but with a lot of these like darker beers, that oxidation will kind of bring out like almost like a sherry character in like more malt forward beers.
Yeah, because you don't want you don't want it too sharp, like because it's moving so slowly. That's why it takes months in the barrels, right? So that's why it tends to be a higher alcohol beer that could sit uncarbonated for months without going.
That's why it also kind of
going off.
Almost requires it to be a higher alcohol beer. You want it to be a higher alcohol beer just because that's sort of the high alcohol content is a safeguard against like infection or shit going awry in the barrel. Because I mean, most like beer spoilers, they don't really, just like yeast, it doesn't really care to be around that type of environment.
Mm-hmm. It's all about what it's comfortable with,
right?
So you could barrel age a small beer, like a 3-4% beer, but you would need something to inhibit that growth. So maybe like a souring bacteria, like inoculating it with a aggressive particular strain, so that it kind of overwhelms the other ones. So you can kind of control right. Isn't that the whole idea of souring and because the oak will? I was reading also about wort sticks. Historically, the wort stick was a thing in, I think, Northern Europe back in the day, which is when the beer would be fermenting and like a nice and bubbling and frothing, like active yeast floating around.
Like high krausen?
High krausen, yeah.
Okay.
They would dip a stick in there and stir it around and let it sit, and then they pull it out and dry it off, and that would be where that would be how they made dry yeast cultures from that.
Okay.
And then because you brewed seasonally depending on the temperature a lot, so you'd have like family wort sticks, or they would make like a woven basket that could scoop that stuff up, and then you dry it out. And that way, when you add it to a fresh batch, it'll kick off again.
It's insane to think that like they had no idea what the fuck they were doing.
But they knew if you stirred it.
They didn't know the why. Again, they didn't know the why, but they understood the how. Like they're like, what is this frothy shit that's got like?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, we don't know, but I'll tell you this: if you put the stick in there and you dry it off, and then you put it in something else later,
you're gonna have a great time.
It's gonna fucking you did
It'll
it right.
Taste the same.
You done good, booby.
Yeah. Apparently, it
good.
would lead to problems too. If somebody was at your house and said something mean, and then your next batch of beer died, you'd be like, that fucker looked at my wort stick funny and cursed it.
Yeah, that's a little hokey.
I'm gonna go burn his house down. Like people got heated about their beers back in the day.
Well, I mean, she was a witch.
Well, witch's brew, actually, you know where that comes from?
No.
Is
Again,
you get a bad batch of beer. If you're a tavern keeper with a reputation, there's only so much you can control before sanitation practices, and they knew the how and not the why, like you said. So they knew that somehow this beer's off. You could taste it. You'd blame the old hag that lived down the street. She wasn't buying your beer anyways, and she cursed it. And that would be the witch's brew. If it was like a bad batch of beer, you assumed, well, I made the same beer 3 times in a row, and this one's bad. I bet it's that old hag.
Thanks, Kathy.
Way to go, Karen.
You're right. Yeah. I meant to.
I don't know why Karens always get blamed.
I do. I've got an Aunt Karen. She's a total bitch.
Oh, I hope you're listening. Like, share, and subscribe, Karen. Aunt Karen.
I talked to my grandmother for the first time in months yesterday, and I called my Aunt Karen an asshole.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, so you stand by it. I like that.
And my granny said, she's a big one, which I thought was adorable.
So back to barrels. We what was I gonna? We're talking about souring. So when I was reading about the wort stick, it made me think about how much yeast that we use now, like that labs have isolated and you can buy. This is a London ale yeast, or this is a German
like pure
Pilsner,
cultures.
Pure cultures. How many of them developed, or where do they end up getting from? Developed because they were cultured in barrels for
somebody's wort stick.
Yeah, they were cultured in barrels over decades and centuries and generations of oak seems to be pretty good at like.
Oh yeah,
yeast likes oak for some reason.
Yeah, well, because it's super porous.
Because it's porous, and that's what we've put it in for 10,000 years now, 5,000 years.
That's also why we put it in oak, is because it's porous. Like I mean, it could be watertight, but like it suits us well. So yeah, I mean, like there's definitely been a lot of like isolation and then propagation over the years from like every source that you can possibly imagine, from like the fucking leaves out in your backyard to like some bottle that somebody found at the bottom of the ocean from a shipwreck back in the 1800s.
Those are so cool. I always love those.
Yeah, it's super. Like I really want to try a shipwreck beer at some points. It's on my bucket list. If you ever get one, just call me.
I was reading a book by a guy, and I forget what he calls himself, a biomechanical archaeologist or something. And he goes around and he scrapes like old vases and jars.
Yeah, a microbiological anthropologist.
Something like that. Well, this guy, he's our whatever bio mamma jamma archaeologist, because he works with the artifacts to scrape residues and then try to sequence what was in it.
That's what Dogfish Head did with their whole ancient ales.
This is the guy who does it. I have one of his books, and like sometimes he got like this whole thing of like these wine jugs,
Right.
these ancient wine jugs, and there was like 50 of them, and they were able to scrape them, and they were able to tell the different wines and all this stuff. But then he got a really good, promising one that had been like left alone for like 100 years in this museum, and he's like, they didn't have the equipment to collect samples then, but he's like, it's been in this like clean room, it should be fine. And he looked in it, and there's a bunch of cigarette butts from the Depression. He tracked it down. It was from when like the CW workers or whatever like were cataloging stuff. They just used it as an ashtray because it was just a big vase that they weren't able to do anything.
Did you just
with.
say vase?
Vase.
Oh my god.
Vase.
Oh,
vase.
Jesus.
Whatever.
Your pretension is showing.
It came out a little bit. But
so that guy, he's done some really, really interesting stuff, like with Midas Touch, and
I have the book somewhere. We can look at it later. Yeah, it's got like 10 of his recipes in it.
Yeah, the
stories behind them.
Midas Touch was one of the first beers that, like, after I finally made, like, I started off drinking it was Red Stripe, because that was what my ex-girlfriend, her mom kept it in her fridge, and she never drank it, so she didn't notice whenever one went missing. So I started off drinking Red Stripe, and then I went from Red Stripe to Newcastle, and which is regretful. And then,
you don't like Newcastle?
No.
You got to have it over there. It's a lot better. It doesn't travel well in those clear bottles.
Never been over there.
Well, we'll go. We'll make a weekend of it.
So yeah, I drank Newcastle for a long time and thought that was just like the bee's knees, if you will.
I won't.
And then
I will not.
And then eventually, like, actually, this is right around the time that the Dogfish Head, their like little docu-series came out on TV, which I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah.
They had the one on Bitches Brew, and had one on Midas Touch, and had one on that fucking chicha bullshit that they made where they had everybody chew up corn and then spit it into a bucket, and they made a beer out of it. And that's
what we're
the
talking
most
about is
vile thing.
These are ancient homebrew recipes that the owner of Dogfish Head, who is known for doing weird beers, and historical recipes, he's all about trying to tackle those. They try to recreate these ancient recipes using, residual chemicals left on containers. The Midas Touch was the first big one they did, and they found some tomb in, I want to say Turkey or Greece, and they think it was King Midas's tomb.
Yes.
Based on how he was buried and all this, but they left a bunch of shit around as like offerings for the afterlife. Or
yeah, he was buried with totes of wine because that's what you did.
Yeah. And but one of the jars they found had beer, had cereal grains, grapes, and honey residues, all from the same batch. So we tend to think of beer, wine, and mead as different beverages, but when sugars were scarce, you kind of just threw it all together. And that's a really cool thing too, looking at historical beers, is you always got to, or anytime, any historical food or sensory thing, it's always like, did we get it right? Was it supposed to taste this bad, or were tastes that different back then?
Yeah, well,
the classic one being a more modern version is the Groot beer. Which I'd like to talk about Groot beer with you for a bit. No, most people don't know what the fuck Groot beer is. No, we're not talking about the happy dancing tree man from the Marvel movies. Groot is a different guy.
Groot.
Okay, Groot. I've heard it said both ways, but we weren't around then. Who knows? But it's Gruit.
Yes.
And it was before hops were really discovered as they're just so perfect for beer.
Right.
They give the bitterness, which balances that sweetness from your malt nicely. It's a natural preservative, and they're also very aromatic, so you can get bitterness or flavor from them. It's kind of an incredible herb. Don't need to tell you about hops. This is for the listeners. But before they discovered that, they used all sorts of shit.
We got to do something else.
And Groot was this spice blend of like rosemary and bog myrtle, and they're not really sure what exactly went into it.
So I've always thought that Groot was like sort of a term, like a catch-all term for
that period.
Well, no, not even for that period, because there's still Groot that's made today, but it's essentially non-hopped beer. It's any beer that is using like
spices
hop
or herbs
substitutes. So like heather tips or
spruce tips.
Yeah.
That's what people use it for now. But like historically, the development of group beers were coming through the Middle Ages. Beer was always like a decentralized local thing. They didn't have scale of industry the way we do now. You had to do shit by hand back then, you lazy millennials. Sorry. Getting excited. So
Easy.
it was a way for the church to actually tax local beer production, was you weren't allowed to make beer without Groot. You weren't allowed to make beer with Groot unless you got the Groot from the church. Like they had a monopoly. It was a proprietary. Yeah, you didn't know.
It was a proprietary blend of like whatever shit they had,
and they wouldn't tell you, so you couldn't make your own. You had to get it from them, and you were definitely overpaying for it because that was their form of taxation. There's always been somebody taking a piece off of the brewing industry throughout history. There's always the taxation of beer making.
The church.
So for a long time, the church was the government in Europe after the Roman Empire collapsed. And so Groot was and since it's the church, they famously don't like to share if they don't want to. We don't really know exactly what was in those Groot beers in 13th, 14th, 15th centuries until the Germans, and that's
probably
part
a bunch of shit that made their.
It's a big reason though the Germans passed the Reinheitsgebot when they did. It was during the Reformation and Lutheranism and all that crap, and it was them being like, "Screw you, we're not giving the church money for our beer." We're going to say that you can't use Groot. You can only use this local hop that we're growing. In fact, if you try to make Groot beer,
it's fucking illegal.
It's illegal to do here. So get that shit back to, go back to France with it.
Go back where you came from.
Go back to wherever. We're not dealing with that. And it just was better. And the English drinkers were like, that. We like this better. Can we get some of those hops? And it took off from there. But now it's,
Fun
it's
thing
pretty
about
much,
this is it doesn't taste like shit.
Yeah. So like I've had several Gruit beers, and I personally think they're all terrible, even if they're interesting and I think worthwhile.
Have you had
tasting.
anything from scratch?
Yes.
They're ones that they're not like straight up, Groot brewers. They're brewing beer, but they use like crazy.
They've done some good hopless beers.
Weird. Well, I mean weird. I don't mean that in terms of like, I'm not saying that from a judgmental or like condescending.
Just abnormal in that.
Yeah, like
or
not
unusual
like
in that they're not usual. Yeah.
Non-conventional.
There you go.
Non-conventional ingredients. Hall River is another one that they use some pretty non-conventional.
And it can work, but
it also like that. Going back to what we were first talking about in terms of like a thoughtful approach to ingredients, I think that like being able to do that and pull it off and do it well is that much more impressive, because it's like you don't have the standard like, oh well, this is how you make this, and this is what these are the ingredients, and you add them at this time, and this whatever, like, or this is how hops work or whatnot. You have these crazy roots and leaves and stems and all sorts of crazy berries and shit that you don't typically find in beer, and then you have to, rely on your best judgment to be able to make that work. Johnny's cracking
I'm getting a beer. Justin's going to entertain you while I pour, everyone. Please rant, Justin.
Yeah,
please.
Oh boy. Not easy.
It's okay. We're going to give you a pass because you're new at this.
Thanks, bud. This is the second podcast. So we are drinking a
North Carolina brewery, also from Greensboro.
That is true. Yes, a oak aged Brett Saison on pomegranate.
Pomegranate. I don't know if that's how you say it.
Yeah,
I always read it.
I am not gonna say it like that.
Yeah, I like this beer though. I've had it before. It's a lot of pomegranate on the front.
It's 300 pounds for a 10-barrel batch.
That's a shitload.
Yeah. When they fruit it, they fruit it.
That's 30 pounds per barrel, right? So that's a lot. So that's a pound per gallon, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a lot of fruit.
That's a lot of fruit.
Yeah.
But it's not overpoweringly pomegranate. That's how strong that oak and Brett. Now, there's a thing. I had someone ask me once if the Brett was the guy who made it, if it was named after him, because it said Brett Saison.
And there's a guy in the corner going, I like beer. I like beer.
I like
beer. I drink beer. I drink a lot of beer.
Me and
Beer's
Squee
good.
and Pidgey and Pinch.
And PJ. Me and Squee and PJ. And we were working out, but we were drinking beers with pomegranate.
Yeah. No, they're not talking about that guy when they call it a Brett beer, right?
That is Brettanomyces. A different.
Bless you. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that a sneeze, or did you say a word?
A waka. So a different type of yeast, separate from like the typical Saccharomyces that 99.9% of beers are made with. Brett works way differently, in its flavor, its aroma. What it can do is vastly different from Saccharomyces, which is
why would I use Brett then?
Because
why would I not just only use it if it's so much more interesting? Oh geez.
Oh boy. Dance break.
All right. I don't know if that came through the audio, but we had a sudden Skype call. We're at about an hour right now, so I might wrap this up, and we're going to try to bring a guest in who can ask more questions. So sorry to rush you there, because I know Luke would like to hear about your Brett definition.
We'll put a pin in that, and we'll come back.
Did you have anything you want to throw in here before we cut this clip?
Just that D.
All right, that's good. I always tell people, having met enough brewers now, that I used to do tours for a brewery, and I would tell people when we'd walk past the brewers, I would say, it's a lot of technical knowledge, but it's also a lot of like thinking on your feet and multitasking. So brewers are mad scientist type people usually. They all love beer, and they're all a little, let's say, off kilter from the norm. So if you
sociopaths,
maybe if you meet a brewer, I always tell people, try to buy them a beer and be like, "No, what do you really feel like? How do you really feel about that?" Like, just get them going, because it's usually entertaining. And
that's a 2-beer conversation, but I'll let you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll regret asking.
So thanks for coming on, Justin.
Yeah,
and we're going to be right back with a little bit more.